They handed me a termination letter on a Tuesday morning, 71 hours before my $148,000 performance bonus was scheduled to clear. I remember looking at the date on that letter and doing the math in my head, standing right there in the boardroom doorway while my new boss, the owner's son-in-law, watched me with his arms crossed, like he'd just won something. I didn't say a word. I folded the letter in thirds, put it in my jacket pocket, and walked back to my office to get my coat. 26 years. That's how long I'd been with Caldwell Industrial Supply. I started there at 31, fresh out of a contract dispute with a smaller firm in Saskatoon, and I built their Western Canada procurement division from 11 clients and a shared fax machine into the largest regional distribution network between Winnipeg and the Rockies. By the time I turned 57, we were moving over $312 million in annual contracts. I knew every supplier relationship personally. I had handshake agreements that predated half the company's current staff. I knew which vendors would hold pricing through Q4, which ones needed a phone call before a renewal, and which ones would walk if they felt disrespected. That knowledge wasn't in any database. It lived in my head and in a set of agreements I'd negotiated myself. 3 years earlier, when the original owner, a man named Caldwell Sr., started talking about stepping back, he sat me down in his office one afternoon and said something I'd thought about almost every day since. He said, "Mitch, I need to know that what we built here survives me." We spent the next 2 weeks with the company's legal team drafting what he called the continuity clause. It was buried in my employment contract, Schedule D, 4 pages in. The short version was this: if I completed 25 years of service and was still active in my role at the time of any major ownership transition or acquisition, valued above $100 million, my accumulated vendor relationship portfolio would revert to my personal professional license upon termination without cause. Not the contracts themselves, the relationships, the access, the preferred vendor status designations I'd spent 26 years earning. In practical terms, it meant that if the company fired me without cause after a certain threshold, those vendors were not obligated to continue their pricing agreements with Caldwell Industrial Supply. They'd renegotiated those terms with me. I was the relationship. Old Caldwell understood what he was doing. He wanted to make sure no future board could use the company as a vehicle for a quick sale without respecting the people who'd built it. He told me that when he signed it, he said, "This makes sure they need you at the table." He retired 18 months ago. His daughter inherited his shares, which I respected. She'd grown up around the business and she wasn't incompetent. But within 4 months of taking over, she married a man who'd spent his career flipping mid-size manufacturing companies in Ontario. His name was Preston. He wore suits that cost more than my first car and spoke in the kind of language that sounds like a McKinsey presentation, even when he's ordering lunch. From the day he got a seat on the board, I could feel what was coming. Preston wanted to sell. There was a private equity firm out of Toronto, Hallbrook Capital, that had been circling the company for 2 years. The deal on the table was $312 million for the full acquisition. For context, the company had been valued at $190 million just 4 years prior. The growth that closed that gap? That was the Western procurement network. That was mine. I wasn't naive. I knew the sale was coming and I wasn't opposed to it in principle. What I was waiting for was the bonus. My contract had a performance clause tied to 3 consecutive years of procurement growth above 14%. We'd hit 17, 19, and 22%. The bonus amount was $148,000. And more importantly, the bonus payment was the final trigger for my Schedule D continuity clause to become exercisable, meaning as long as I received the bonus and remained employed at the time of any acquisition, my vendor portfolio rights were protected and transferable under new ownership. Without the bonus, the clause had a gap. Preston, I suspect, figured this out. The termination letter cited organizational restructuring in anticipation of acquisition integration, no performance issues, no misconduct. Just a clean corporate phrase that meant nothing and cost nothing, except they thought it cost them $148,000 and whatever vendor headaches they assumed they could manage without me. I drove home that Tuesday afternoon and called my wife Elaine. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I'd been let go. There was a pause, and then she said, very quietly, "How long until the bonus date?" I told her 71 hours. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Come home, we'll make dinner." That's the thing about being married for 31 years to the right person. She didn't panic. She didn't catastrophize. She knew I wasn't the kind of man who got caught without a plan. I'd actually spoken to a labor lawyer in Calgary 6 months earlier, just out of caution. Not because I thought this would happen, but because I could see Preston reading documents he wasn't supposed to be reading and asking questions about vendor contracts that had nothing to do with his role. My lawyer, a sharp woman who'd been practicing employment law for over 20 years, had reviewed my contract in detail. She told me Schedule D was ironclad. She also told me that if I was ever terminated without cause within 90 days of a major acquisition, I had grounds for wrongful dismissal and the vendor clause would be fully enforceable. I also had something else. 3 months prior, I'd begun quietly notifying my top 14 vendor contacts, the ones managing our platinum tier accounts, that there might be changes in leadership coming and that they should be aware their agreements were relationship-based. I wasn't soliciting anything. I was informing. Every one of those conversations was documented with a timestamp and a follow-up email through my personal business address. I wasn't hiding anything. I just wanted a clear record of what those relationships were and who they were with. So when I got home that Tuesday, while Elaine was making pasta, I sat at the kitchen table and sent an email to my lawyer. 1 paragraph. It happened. Tuesday, March 11th. Termination without cause. 71 hours before bonus payment date. She responded, within 20 minutes. Don't contact the company. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. The next 2 days were quiet in a way that felt almost surreal. I took the dog for long walks. Elaine and I watched a documentary about the Canadian Arctic that we'd been meaning to get to for months. I slept well, which surprised me. I think I slept well because I'd spent 26 years doing things the right way, and I knew what that was worth. On Thursday afternoon, 47 hours after my termination, my phone started showing missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. Then a number I did recognize, the main Caldwell corporate line. I didn't answer. My lawyer had been clear, do not respond to any contact from the company without her present. By Friday morning, she called me. She'd received a formal communication from Caldwell's legal team. The Hallbrook Capital deal had stalled. 3 of my 14 platinum vendors, accounting for just under $94 million in annual contract volume, had notified Caldwell that they were not prepared to honor their current pricing agreements under new ownership unless there was a continuity provision in place for the vendor relationship structure I had personally established. 2 more were requesting clarification on whether their agreements were still active, given the personnel changes. 1 had already retained their own counsel. Preston had apparently not told Hallbrook about Schedule D, or he had told them and assumed it wouldn't matter. Either way, Hallbrook's acquisition team had done their own due diligence and found the clause, and they were now telling Caldwell that the deal couldn't close at $312 million without vendor confirmation. Every day of delay was costing money in holding costs, legal fees, and board anxiety. My lawyer told me Caldwell's legal team was requesting a meeting. I told her to let them wait over the weekend. On Monday morning, we met in a boardroom at my lawyer's office in Calgary. Across the table were 2 of Caldwell's lawyers and Preston. He looked like he hadn't slept. I wore the same jacket I'd been wearing when they handed me the termination letter. They offered reinstatement at a 15% salary increase. I said no. They offered a one-time payment of $200,000 and a consulting arrangement. I said no. They offered the original bonus plus $175,000 in severance and a consulting arrangement. My lawyer and I had discussed this. We had a number. I told them I wanted a formal release from the continuity clause, compensation structured as a vendor relationship transition agreement, which under Alberta employment and commercial law was a different category of payment. totaling $390,000, payable within 10 business days. I also wanted a written letter of reference on company letterhead signed by the board chair and the formal acknowledgement that my termination was without cause, which they had already documented in the termination letter itself. Preston looked at the wall when I said the number. One of the lawyers leaned over and whispered something to him. He nodded, barely. It took 4 more days and 2 more rounds of revisions, but they signed. The total came to $387,500 after a small adjustment my lawyer agreed to on the timeline. The wire hit my account on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after the termination letter. Hallbrook's acquisition of Caldwell Industrial Supply closed 6 weeks later at a revised valuation, restructured around a vendor transition plan that, ironically, several of my former contacts reached out to ask my opinion on. I didn't charge anyone for those conversations. I just told them what I thought. Honestly, the way I always had. I want to be clear about something. I didn't feel triumphant when the money arrived. I didn't feel vindicated in any dramatic sense. What I mostly felt was tired and then, slowly, something lighter. Like setting down a bag you didn't realize you'd been carrying. Elaine and I took 3 weeks in late April and drove out to Prince Edward Island. We'd been talking about doing it for a decade and kept finding reasons to wait. We rented a small house near Cavendish, walked the red sand beaches in the mornings, ate seafood every night, and read actual books in the afternoon. My youngest called one evening and asked how I was doing. I told her honestly that I was doing better than I had in years. I've since started a small advisory practice working with independent suppliers and mid-sized procurement operations, nothing large, a few clients a year. I work from home 3 days a week, take Fridays off entirely, and I've gotten back into woodworking. Something I hadn't done seriously since my late 20s. I'm building a dining table for my son and his wife. It's taking longer than it probably should. I'm okay with that. People sometimes ask me what I would have done differently. And the honest answer is almost nothing on the professional side. Document everything. Understand your contract completely, not just the salary line. Build real relationships, not networking, not LinkedIn connections, actual relationships built on consistency and follow-through. And if someone ever tells you that you're indispensable to something they're building, ask them to put it in writing. What I might do differently on the personal side is take the time more seriously. Not just save for it, actually plan for it. I spent 26 years building something for a company and not nearly enough time building a life outside of it. Elaine never complained. That might be the most generous thing she ever did for me. But I see now what I was asking of her. The dining table has a small knot in one of the boards that I almost rejected when I was selecting the lumber. I kept it. It's going to be right near the edge, visible but not center stage. I think it suits the piece. Some things that look like flaws are just the proof that the wood was real. I was fired on a Tuesday morning. By the following Thursday, I was sitting at my kitchen table, watching the first spring robins land in the backyard, drinking coffee that I didn't have to rush, waiting for nothing. That's what 26 years of doing it right eventually looked like. I've been thinking about that termination letter a lot lately, not with bitterness, that passed sooner than I expected, but with a kind of quiet clarity that only comes after the noise settles. What happened to me wasn't luck, and it wasn't some cosmic system handing out rewards and punishments based on who deserved what. It was simpler than that, and more honest. Over 26 years, I made a series of choices. I showed up consistently. I treated vendor relationships like they actually mattered, because they did, to me. Not just as leverage, but as genuine professional trust to build one conversation at a time. I documented things carefully. I asked a lawyer to review my contract before I ever thought I'd need one. None of those choices felt dramatic at the time. They were just the way I tried to do things right. And when the moment came, when Preston handed me that letter on a Tuesday morning, all of those quiet choices were already in place, waiting. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell stories like this. The outcome wasn't decided on the day I was fired. It was decided years earlier in the accumulation of how I'd chosen to conduct myself. The letter was just the moment it became visible. I think about Caldwell Sr. sometimes. He was the one who insisted on Schedule D. He understood something that his son-in-law didn't, that real value in business isn't held by a company. It's held by people, by relationships, by the kind of quiet competence that doesn't make headlines but holds everything together. Preston saw a spreadsheet. Caldwell Sr. saw people. That difference in understanding, in genuine intelligence about how the world actually works, is what separated a man who built something lasting from a man who nearly destroyed it in a weekend. Elaine keeps asking me if I miss it. The work, the deals, the phone calls at 6 in the morning from a supplier in Vancouver. I tell her honestly that I miss parts of it. The problem solving, the satisfaction of a well-negotiated agreement where both sides left the table feeling respected. I don't miss the uncertainty of working for people who saw me as a line item. What I've come to believe, and this isn't something I could have articulated at 51 or even 55, is that the way you carry yourself through ordinary days is the only real preparation you have for extraordinary moments, not grand gestures, not networking events, or carefully curated reputations. Just the daily decision to be someone whose word means something, who finishes what they start, who treats a handshake like a document and a document like a promise. Preston moved fast. He assumed that speed and authority were enough. He found out they weren't, not without the foundation that I'd spent more than 2 decades laying. I'm not angry at him. I actually think he learned something that week, though I doubt he'd say so out loud. What I know is that the dining table I'm building in my garage right now has better joinery than anything I've made in years, because I'm not rushing. I have the time to do it properly. That's what I'd tell anyone who asks what the whole thing taught me. Do the work. Do it honestly. Stay patient enough to let the results find you. The rest tends to take care of itself.